Just before we start, some things maybe which should have been said before in the introduction was, of course, it's a adaptation of a short story by C.V. Sriraman, and I think a couple more films were also adapted from C.V. Sriraman's stories by Aravindan. The other thing I wanted to probably say before we start was that Aravindan's foray into filmmaking is also, that was a time when there was a film society movement, so he was part of establishing film societies in a couple of places where he worked with the Rubber Board. He used to get transferred from place to place while working in Rubber Board. So he established at least 2 film societies by himself. Then also, that was the time when FTI had just started in the early 60s, the Film and Television Institute of India. And Adur Gopalakrishnan, who was, I think, probably one of the first batch of FTI students, went back to Kerala after his graduation, and he started a film society called Chitralekha Film Society, which was also Aravindan was also part of. And he sort of assisted Adur in one of Adur's early film, which never got released, but that's where he started to sort of move from theatre and music and his illustration drawing work to, and painting to filmmaking. Yeah, this is just sort of the prelude for our conversation. So I guess, do you want to start talking about the whole...
Okay. Well, first of all, I should say that my very good friend C.S. Venkateswaran, one of the major film theorists from Kerala, is actually writing a book on Aravindan. And the more I speak to him about Aravindan, the more I realize how little I know about Aravindan. So I do not speak as anyone who has any great expertise in Aravindan, but just a couple of personal statements and then a little bit of film history and then maybe a few comments on the film and then we move on. First of all, it is his last film, and there is always something incredibly significant and poignant about a filmmaker's last film, when he leaves you. It's you might call it like, Ghatak's Chukti Tha or Kappo, for example, or, when you make a film which is his finale, the film that he wants you to remember him by, almost, as it were. I say this for personal reasons because I had a curious personal history with it, which is that I saw the film in its very first ever screening, public screening, that is. This was actually in 1991, I think, in the Chennai Film Festival, the International Film Festival, which was that year in Chennai. And this film wasn't in the festival, but it had a private screening outside the festival. And there was a small group of people. P.K. Nair was there, and a lot of other younger filmmakers were there. And Aravindan was, of course, himself there. Now, I have a very strange confession to make to you, and that is that I had forgotten that Mohanlal was in it. Now, this is not because I forgot that Mohanlal was in it, but that 30 years on, what I remember about the film is not Mohanlal. What I remember about the film are 2 main things. One is this woman, Arati, and the second, the documentary footage. The fact that he actually would have shot in real spaces and that many of the people whom he filmed were probably actually refugees. And that sequence that you have at the end when they're going into the, they're climbing up, and then the sequence with Mohanlal and Neena Gupta and the Nilanjana, there as a piece of fiction inside what is clearly a documentary sequence. Now, I now realize, is almost a cipher. He is almost a non-presence in the film, a combination of an eyewitness, a man who's there, not there. And I think it's an incredible performance by Mohanlal, a major star at that point of time, to play this kind of a role, of a figure who's just literally, who's to use a term from visual arts, a cipher or a trace. He's just got this peculiar quality of a trace of some kind, which is I think, really quite remarkable. And when you think back on it, it's the fact that he has effaced his stardom, and then when he walks, there are sequences when actually he is asked in front of the camera to do nothing. And it takes a major actor to be able to do nothing in front of a camera when the camera is on, just look or whatever. There were moments in the film, when, for example, I don't even remember the one stupid little sequence, this gesture, when all the people are coming out of the truck, and he raises his hand like that. I actually remembered another extraordinary Arvindan performance, which was similarly based on almost non-action, and that is Gopi's performance in Thampu. When he's actually directing the tent to be lifted. So this was a little bit of an autobiographical aside on the film, mainly because I personally take how you remember a film very seriously. You'll think of this. I mean, when you see a film after 30 years, and this is what I've seen since 1991, and then you ask yourself, is this how it was? There's certain kinds of films that are, you might call stable, meaning you see a film 30 years later and you say, it is the same film. And there are some films which when you see again and again and again, it's as though every time you see it, it's a different film. These are unstable films that somehow or the other don't settle in, and they become constantly sort of new discoveries every time you see them. That was one thing I wanted to say, and a couple more comments on the film, and then I can move on. But in a prefatory thing about Arvindan himself. Now, there's something very strange you notice, which is that you close your eyes and you imagine an idiom which you might say is Arvindan's style. What is his Arvindan style? It's usually slow cinema, it is a certain kind of a languorous sort of a camera movement and a certain sort of, ability to rest on people and on objects and so on. And then when you see any one of his films, none of the films actually look like that. Every film seems to be a curious departure from that idiom that you associate with him, which I was always very baffled by. So, there is a situation, for me, I have a particular fondness for Uttarayanam, which is I think it's a truly, truly remarkable film. That's the film.
His first film.
That's the film that really, I think, was a landmark film. Then there is a clutch of films in between. Thampu, well, we come to Pokuvel in a minute, but really it's Thampu, it's Kanchan Sita, and above all, Estepan. That is a masterpiece. I actually am not as much a fan of Kumar T, but Estepan is a truly major film, as is Uttarayanam, right? Then you come, in my view, to a sort of a fallow period. So these films like Pokuvel are films I do not have. I think Chidambaram is an important film, but then you have this period, when he makes a lot of films which I don't particularly, and then this particular sort of finale film. There are a lot of things that he does which are very un-Arvindan-like. For example, this constant use of very embodied music. He'll have flute, he'll have sitar. He doesn't shy away from melodrama, which is what you'd expect a kind of filmmaker working with slow cinema to be able to do. Last comment. This is actually a funny thing about Adur. You mentioned Adur Gopalakrishnan, and I think it was Kumar Shahani. What had happened was that Kumar Shahani and Adur Gopalakrishnan were in, I think it was Montpellier in France. And Adur went on and said, oh my God, what a place, what a fantastic city, what a this, everything. So Kumar Shahani says to Adur that, Adur, isn't it time you made a film outside Kerala? And Adur says, no, I can never make a film outside Kerala, impossible. So to have a Malayali filmmaker, quintessentially Malayali filmmaker, to make a film in Calcutta, I think was a really major and crucial point to make in that kind of idiom, which I was I think one is extremely moved by his ability to do that in that particular context. So so these were a couple of sort of comments I wanted to make to start with. I don't know how we'll take this one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I agree with you almost on everything. Of course, the personal anecdote is your own. But one thing for me, I think when I was thinking about it, like I messaged you also, I guess, is that when I rewatched Vastuhara, now it feels like a completely different film than the memory that I had of it. And more poignant, maybe because migration, displacement has become so normalized today that we kind of, war after war, and also even without war, the migration is a necessity for all of us almost. It's a compulsion, right? So it kind of has that kind of connotation which hits you hard with that idea. Even I feel the footage of in the film of, if you carefully see, there's a lot of movement whether it's walking, whether it's train, whether it's ship. So there is a lot of, and the sounds of the traffic. There is, I don't know if he intended, but it does come across as there is a certain, the metaphor of migration throughout. And it's also, he himself is displaced in a way because he's working in Andaman and Calcutta, but he's from Kerala, so he finds his little Kerala in Calcutta with that hotel and, you know, that burly man who's always around him, which is a very Arvindan trick to do all the time. So that is, it seemed to hit me when I rewatched it again. And it also reminded me that Arvindan's main sort of, I think, forte, which was also, of course, can be attributed to people like Manikal, Kumar Sani, and at least these three, is that there is an preoccupation or an interest in sort of externalizing the inner life, right? So we are watching this entire film with this POV of Mohanlal's character, Venu, but we are all that shots which in a film school people might say, oh, what is this shot, nikal do isko, kind of thing, like when he's standing at the parapet at the at the terrace, in the terrace, and shots like that are that to show that there is contemplation, like he's going through this thought process, he's battling his dilemmas. So Aravindan from the time of Uttarayanam was very much, I feel, interested in sort of how do you portray an inner life, which is also something Mani and Kumar Sani also did quite a bit, right? So there is how do we tell a story which is happening, everything is inside him, right? So that's why this acting of Mohanlal is again extraordinary. Of course, it's, I'm sure, well instructed by Arvindan as well, because it's stripped bare of all its access and all its extra gestures that Mohanlal usually has. And it's like, even if we can even see a pimple, there is no makeup, absolutely, he's sweating means he's sweating, there is no real, all that, of course, that realism, authenticity is there, but also these gestures that if he's just looking this side, he might have been told to just look that way and the camera, and it feels like he's thinking about this problem in his life, or he's thinking about these refugees, And that monologue, of course, adds to what we know of his inner life, because that monologue is not a monologue which is neutral. It is like sort of his own feelings about these refugees in the beginning as well as the end. So I feel this preoccupation with this inner thought process and externalizing it in cinema, finding a language to how do I portray inner life, or is something which I find in many of Aravindan's films. I think even Pukkuvel, although it's probably is much slower than this and it demands a lot more attention, is also a similar attempt at trying to, we see in Pukkuvel, if people don't know, it's about a young man who's mentally disintegrating and going into a mental problem. So, and how do we see that? How do we show without someone else telling us that he is having this problem, or verbalizing it, right? So I feel that connection Arvindan always had. So I don't know if you want to share your thoughts on this.
Yeah. No, the only problem there being this kind of psychologization of inner conditions, that I think would be an absolute no-no certainly for Manikal, who would actually have this idea of the cipher. And I think Arvindan does share that particular thing. But this actually is connected, I think, with the way that the film itself is. For example, migration, now that was the other problem, which is I didn't exactly remember this as a partition film, again, so from 1991. Not because it isn't a partition film, but because I think there's a curious problem there, right? What is the curious problem? The curious problem is that there is a classical partition narrative involving Bengali cinema, which we know very well, right? It's all to do with partition in the 40s, and there are these photographs, Sunil Jana, there is of course Ghatak, and there are a huge amount of literary and cinematic and poetic material that's about that particular story. So there is that particular history. What there isn't is, for example, a character like Kunhuni and why he went to Dhaka. This was confusing for me because there's no explanation as to why he went to Dhaka. This is a very Malayali problem, because in Malayali cinema you constantly have men leaving with no reason why. They just go away I mean, I don't know if you remember a very early Malayali film called, I think, Jivita Nauka with Tikurisi Sukumaran Nair, where he actually is pining for his wife and you wonder why he doesn't go home. There is no explanation. He's just pining. He's just pining because he has to pine. Otherwise, they will go to the Gulf or they will go somewhere. They just go away. Now, this non-narrative for why the men leave...
There is some hint, though, that he's a student activist, so maybe the politics, communist politics, etc. I thought that was the connection.
Could be, but I doubt if that... I mean, that doesn't... In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't fit any partition narrative that we are familiar with, right? It's a separate narrative entirely. Which then brings you to the structure that he has. Now, what I think happened was, I was trying to find C.V. Sriraman's short story, by the way, and I wasn't able to find the English translation. There is an English translation which is available. But I think what essentially happened was that he started with, this is how I think he must have made the film. He started with these 4 women, there's basically the mother, there is the character, the Bhavani character, and then there is the Aarti character, but most importantly perhaps there is the Neena Gupta, the Damayanti character. These 4 women who are there, and they would be crucially sort of the kind of characters he'd work with, and he works very strongly with characters in this. I mean, that's what I'm saying. The kind of psychologization thing is a little odd because he looks at them as Ghatak might also, as what at least Paul Willeman used to call condensations. These are like they are like, in that sense, they're not narrative entities as much as they are conceptual condensations. Okay. Now, in that exists two situations that arise. One is a man who, again, this kind of man, this particular sort of male figure who seems to have no ambition or no desire, who will go where life takes him, more or less, who's a kind of a cipher, as I suggested. And this documentary footage. So all of this is going to be set inside Calcutta, on Writers Building Road, in different locations, in places where very, very crucially no one's going to recognize who Mohanlal is, and he can then walk through the streets and no one's going to turn and say, look, there is Mohanlal. I mean, it's a famous kind of a ploy that's kind of used. And this was what I think he began the film with, right? I have a feeling that he actually constructed the film as he went along with these tropes.
In his interview, he said, I remember there was this long interview in Deep Focus long back, or maybe after that. So he said that there was, in the short story, I think the Bhavani is a little bit more audacious, as in she smokes and she's like, she's supposed to be, extremely outcasted by her family, which doesn't come across so much in the film. He made a choice to leave out some of that. But of course, there is enough with the flashback romance scene that she's dating both men. So that thing is there. But this excess of her contemporary behavior compared to the short story, he felt it's excessive, and he said he stripped it down to having her as this. He changes her, as in she becomes the good character in the film, but in the story she's not supposed to be like that. Yeah, so I mean, so there are supposed to be a number of changes which apparently the writer was okay with, but there are supposed to be a number of changes that he had made to the story, while adapting it. What the film does very well is a very humanist. Of course, this is what art can do, right? It can humanize this whole historical event through this story of this one particular family, and that's a good film like this can do that, right? So it completely takes this event. It's not discussing why partition happened or what happened. It's just that's the background. It has happened, and how did common people or how did ordinary people live through it, or what was the consequences of such a historical event, which we don't think twice when we are tweeting about war hona chahiye or whatever. But if there is something, the consequences, I think art like this can really bring out quite well.
There was this question, I think, of Vinayak the other day as to what was Arvindan's politics, and there's a political question here. I suspect that the term humanism would work here because it is not a radical film. Now, the point is that there is that sort of reference to the no, that girl, what's her name? The Damayanti and her brother, who are probably Nakshalites, right? I mean, they're probably in the ML at that point of time. But, I mean, I do remember in Padatik there is this whole discussion about humanism, when, I mean, and there is a sort of, in the famous Althusserian sense, anti-humanist manifesto, like statement about this, which is that, you do not have humanist values, because humanism is almost a bourgeois sort of an aesthetic. In that sense, what is curious is that here is Aravindan, who is attempting the kind of street scenes that clearly evoke Mrinal Sen, certainly because it is Calcutta, but also because the concealed camera and a lot of the stuff that you get in films like Interview, Chorus, those early, before Bhuvan Shom, those early Calcutta films that you get. But what does divide Aravindan from Mrinal Sen is that Aravindan is a humanist and Mrinal Sen is not. That division is a very crucial one. It is a crucially significant political division to have. And we must remember that humanism was not a value-free kind of ideology. Ray, for example, was critiqued for being a humanist. I don't know, any comments, any questions?
Yeah, I guess we can just make it interactive and sort of...
I found it really interesting how you started this conversation about talking about how we remember a movie we've previously seen, because it's not been quite long that I've seen this movie, but I remember it so differently. And this idea of like memory of what you interact with, whatever art it is, it's been simmering in my head, and like you've given words to it. So thank you so much for that. And I think about those shots of Govindan, Govindan's general shots where there's a lot of observational, where there's a lot of movement and all of that. And I wonder how they would be different if there was no music, because I clearly remember this music. I clearly remember the Kumati music and the emotions they give to these kind of pillow shots. So I was wondering if you've got anything to say about how Aravindan treats music and how he treats sound.
It's one of his. Frankly, it's one of his features in cinema which I am least persuaded by. His use of very, very over-the-top use, particularly the sitar and the flute, which he has great and for me uncomprehensible, uncomprehending kind of affiliation to. This is a history to this. I mean, they used to say this about Rossellini, that his soundtracks weren't so great. That a certain kind of use of over-the-top music. Ordinarily to assume that a film like this would work with primarily effects tracks. Yeah. Very, very little music. If at all, the music would be diegetic music, or like the baul songs that you have. But this very choral kind of, when they have that picnic, for example, I just couldn't get over the amount of sitar there was. It was something else, and this is not unique to this film. It is an Aravindan feature which we have to take. There's also something that does not. When you close your eyes and think of an Aravindan film, you don't think of this level of musical sound that's there. So it is unusual. I know you have something to say about it.
Yeah, I think most critics have criticized the music of this film because of its being excessive and melodramatic and adding too much to the shots as the visual montage of the growth of the relationship between the three, which is almost 2.5-3 minutes of montage, is completely overridden by the music. Because when he doesn't have music, I find the film very interesting. Like when he has the diegetic sound of the traffic, of the train, and all this, and even when the conversation between Nilanjana Mitra and him, the Aarti and him, is where they are, almost like pausing, and there is a very cinematic realism kind of stylization of, the camera is on her, then on him. Both are not saying anything, but there is no music. That's a great moment, because then we are sort of able to read more into that moment than words. Of course, that was his style also, that sparing use of dialogue, etc., and more with the camera looking at people's faces. So I think I also agree that music, even in Uttarayanam, I think is a big problem. Pukkuvel, for example, is the one film maybe where the music has a bigger role. I can't remember exactly now, but and Estepan, where he decides to
Estepan it works. Estepan it really works because of the kind of
correct,
craziness
yes,
and that whole sort of pop culture.
So those two films probably is where where he's more conscious. I think he was also very interested in for people who know editing to the music, which is very an interesting. And that's what being trained in music but not be trained in cinema maybe makes him do. But it's very interesting that he used that approach.
This I really did not remember this as a partition film either. To me personally, it was a film about people trying to find a home, which is something it's not something. It is something what migrants do. To me, it was like not just finding a home as in like a physical thing, but finding a place where you emotionally belong. For example, these people, the Bengali lady, her husband's not there. So it was like she was trying to find a place to belong. It felt like it's not just physically, but a lot of us are emotionally also refugees in a way, trying to find.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry. I mean, not only emotionally, I think also culturally.
Yeah.
Right? Like for him, he's in, Calcutta, and which also goes back to some of Ghatak's films also, right? Where where he very famously wanted to, there's that we lost our culture because we were forced to migrate, my river, all that kind of motifs that we were there. Right? Similar thing is probably not dealt more, but here, but cultural, emotional, physical, all kinds of tropes are there. Right? And I think this could be added to that block of cinema which looks at post-partition in a way, like, in terms of Garam Hawa, this, and Vasuvara, and of course Ghatak's 3 films, I would say. We all together maybe a partition festival is what it calls, post-partition festival.
I, of course, had absolutely no idea about this involvement of the Malayali community in Calcutta. Being from Calcutta, it seems that were we like oblivious to this. And the thing that, of course, struck me the most about this film is that there is such a film. I just want to know that, what led Arvindan to either go to Calcutta and make a film like this, and, which is really like what you said, humanist, and the community that, they do is absolutely the Namo Shudras, which are like, are the Dalits, and very important issues now because the current government is working on that community to get their votes because, they're neither accepted as, as Hindus, etc. And, this happened in 71. So what would have led him, because in terms of background, to a film like this for a person to go and make a film like this?
Good question. I don't know. But then, that's the other thing, along with remembering, is an art form, I think, that I have a great deal of fascination for, and that is to speculate. So let us speculate on why he might have made it. We have no idea. We have no knowledge. He is not here to tell us. So let's imagine, okay? I have imagined that what he wanted to do was to find the documentary locations where he would find the real people who were the dispossessed, and set his actors amongst those. So it will be this peculiar sort of form of docufiction, where you will actually instill a fictional thing within a documentary reality, which then leads me to ask as to where he found the documentary reality in the early 90s. What was the context in the early 90s that would have allowed him to locate a film 20 years earlier than it was actually set? Now, were it to have been set and shot in a certain kind of a milieu, it would have made a certain sort of sense. So he made this 20 years later, but he has used documentary footage. So then the question would be that were that refugee movement and the documentary footage associated with that movement have been the further basis of this. Now, this is where the political questions come in, because on the one hand, there is that history. On the other hand, there is this whole other thing about Malayali migration to Calcutta. And then there is this third thing of the further relocation of those people to the Andaman islands, and the fact that he is now shooting this 20 years after all of these incidents. This is what I think is what makes for a particularly interesting speculative thing. But why would he have wanted to? Why would he wanted to do this?
Yeah.
It is the case, just to add to the mix, the fact that he made this. I mean, it's always a little awkward to say this about filmmakers when they make their last film, which is, do they know when they shoot making it as to whether this is going to be their last film or not? Did Ritwik Ghatak know that Jukti Thakur Gopo is going to be his last film? There's almost a sense of a testament film where you say, this is how I shall now remember, or how I shall want this history to be remembered. The connection between Bengal and Kerala in terms of radical histories and Purnapra Vayalar and all those histories associated with the radical movements in Bengal is a well-known one. And I wonder whether that too was something that he might have wanted in some ways to write a footnote on. But I think those would be what I would describe as the straws in the wind that we would need to be able to reconstruct why a film like this was made as recently as the early 90s.
Since you said let's speculate together, and we are
lovely.
now looking at Aravindan, his over, and cinema in general, to me, back in the 80s, the one filmmaker who struck me with the poetic and the spiritual in cinema, Indian independent cinema, has been Aravindan. Though this film has flashes of it, but this is more overtly political, and I think there's been enough discussion on it anyway. So I was wanting to ask you, Ashish and Basav, what do you think of this movement in cinema of the poetic and the spiritual, with particular reference to Aravindan? If you...
I mean, Aravindan's favorite filmmaker was Tarkovsky. So, obviously, yeah. So, obviously there was, he intended to make, and Tarkovsky, as you know, was known for spiritual cinema or whatever that has been articulated. His cinema has been articulated as that. So I think there might have been that because of that to make something transcendent.
Transcendent.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I think, and that happens with, you can see it in particular sequences, no? Like in Uttarayanam, the ending, he goes into the forest. It's like seeking spiritual sort of closure to the character rather than sort of, even in Estepan, he goes into and even in Kanchan Sita with the Ram going into the river, right? So that, and at the same time he's carrying that the sunset is happening and the stroke. It's very kind of like sort of, and even in Kumati, finding in the visual images that he creates, trying to find something which seems surreal or transcendental. So yeah. So this, I feel, yes, he kind of yearned for it to create that feeling, and that's how, because I think it's something to do with his engagement with rather philosophical aspects than the narrative aspects of the characters. The interest is more in like this one character's journey rather than this story around what is happening, right? The politics is, for example, is a subtext of the background, but the character's individual journey is what seems like Aravindan's main thrust in his films. Yeah.
There is, in addition, I think a specific problem in Malayalam cinema, which I think is worth talking about here, which I think Aravindan, I mean, it's his last film and so on, would have been an older problem. And that is that in Malayalam cinema, we have a very strong socialist, realist political history, right? Associated with Thopil Bhasi and, the Kerala people, the KPAC and, all of that. That history is huge. So when these filmmakers come along, they are, I had one time talked about the big realism and with a capital R realism and little realism, which is more in the humanist mode, more, shall we say, transcendental in this. Now, there have been a number of political crises that have arisen. I mean, for example, Adur Gopalakrishna's Mukhamukham would be one such instance, when actually he takes on that particular political legacy. Or even a film like Piravi would be another instance when you would actually have a certain sort of almost like a confrontation between contested ideas of political realism, as it were. In that, I think essentially, to use your word spirituality would be anathema to the big realists. They would not ordinarily want to work with that because it would be seen again, as I said earlier, to be a bourgeois kind of an attribute. But you mentioned Tarkovsky. I was a bit surprised by that, by the way. But the filmmaker whom I imagine they would have all, prayed at the feet of was Bresson. And that tradition of spirituality, I think, is something that a lot of the new cinema filmmakers had inherited, and to some extent in Kerala, a lot in Bombay, but even Mrinal Sen's Kandahar, to take an example, I mean, that would be an instance of that sort of cinema. And it would be a kind of an internal battle between how you're able to give a certain character a certain kind of an autonomous breathing space for a subjective condition that isn't yoked to an ideology or to a particular political structure, right? So a character like Venu would be, in that tradition, something of a really major departure. Although, I mean, we do agree that, this is a film made very much later than that. But I would want, I think, to some extent, to put that history in this context as well. I think a number of characters, I mean, I can't remember the name of the film, but a TV Chandran film featuring Mammootty that's actually set in the Kayur uprisings. Does someone remind me? It's got a long name. Sorry? No.
1920.
No. It's got a very long name. Sorry? It's set in the Kayur uprising Mammootty film by TV Chandran. Anyway, be that as it may, those would be, I think, key characters that would be, you might say, ancestors to Venu. I mean, I'd like to sort of think of that history, and I leave it to you as a possible thought.
Even in Chidambaram, right, the obsession is that the idea of guilt, right, which is a guilt of a guy who is involved in extramarital affair leading to the death of the man. And so the whole film is about that. So it's like trying to understand, and what is the final sequence? Again, he goes into the temple, right? So it's like sort of almost like that seems to be the answer and in Uttarayanam, the answer to his disillusionment and unemployment and all that is that he walks into the forest. At one point, Arvindan said that in his interview again, is that he wanted to become a sannyasi and he almost tried. So I guess all these are playing by default into... but I guess one way to look at his films is to look at that one character story, because I think his main interest in the film is that just that one character. The rest are just playing, I'm surprised they gave Neena Gupta Best Supporting Actor award for this, but something like that, I don't think it's in his conscience as much as it's on. So if you carefully watch the number of times camera stops or lingers on Mohanlal's face, is just way too many. Yeah.
The character of Kunyunni, his uncle, out of which these characters' lives have changed, right, has been intentionally kept mythical, or rather hidden, or them not shown as such. I'm still not sure why was that being done. So what was the reason behind, or is there some kind of a perception or perspective towards that?
What's the question? Why was he?
The character of his uncle,
Why was he not there?
Yeah, I mean, at the max you only see a wrist where Shobana is being...
Sorry? He just alluded. I wonder, does anyone know the short story? And I wonder whether he's a character in that story. Because he's clearly off screen, and that's a very, very important decision for him to take, that he's a non-presence.
I think it circles back to the idea that the character of Kunyuni is important for Mohanlal's character. He has had a childhood where he's fond of that uncle.
No, that you get. But why is he missing from the film?
I mean, in the flashback, maybe he could have come.
He could have been in it.
I don't know. I mean, that's speculation. I don't. Yeah.
What I feel is that the character of Kunyuni is someone who was a role model to Mohanlal's character, to Venu. I think he wants us to see Kunyuni from the same perspective of Venu. That, you know what, I only know of this person, you know, he's this great person. I don't associate anything particularly negative to this person. And I want, I think that's what Aravindan also intends us to, you know, see, like that he is this person who is probably incapable of anything, you know, bad, or, you know, that's how Venu sees it, right? So by keeping it, you know, intentionally obscure and kind of, you know, leaving it to our guess, right? I think he achieves that too, you know, that.
I mean, I agree, and also I have a question. The thing is that I agree with what you just said, okay? But I feel this, that in the first place, he is not obscure. We know a lot about him. He has a motivation. He has a reason to be in the film. You know, we know a lot about him, but he is missing from the frame. You know, so it's a specific sort of decision. I could have easily imagined all of what you have said, and in a more conventional way, having him in the frame, even if briefly. But the fact that he's just literally a cipher is above and beyond what you've said.
I feel it's also the thing that it's a powerful character, number one. So it's gonna, if Kunyuni is in the film, he needs a lot more role in terms of the dramatic structure. Right?
Classic guest appearance from Mammootty.
Yes, like that. Something like that would have been required. And secondly, I feel, yeah.
I have a perspective. Maybe they wanted to show Kunyuni as a faded memory from Mohanlal's point of view. When he was very young itself, he departed from their family and he was not even able to remember his face. It's everything from Mohanlal's point of view. Maybe.
Also, it's too perfect a character, no? I mean, it doesn't seem like we know any flaws of his. Like, you know, like, I mean, Mohanlal kind of, we know that although he has this existential thought process, there is no action about all that. So he's just, you know, a bureaucrat who can't even break a small rule of sending agricultures.
I think we're onto something here. It's an interesting problem here. And, you know, the absence of a character, I mean, to continue the earlier point, you know, between a distinction between what the character believes in or what he might have stood for versus who he was. You know, so that, you know, if you were to have the person on screen, then the person would have had to have an actual subjective condition, you know, whereas here he can be more an abstraction. However, I mean, whether he's remembered or whether he stands for something, whether, you know, it's a kind of it's a semiotic, you know, decision actually of a certain kind. I'm trying to wonder if this is specific to this film or whether he's done it before. Kanchan Sita. Obviously.
Sita is absent.
You know, the absence of a certain character who is, you know, who is all around you. That's an example. So yeah, so there would be something in him that would be doing this.
So it must be to accentuate the absence that Mohanlal's character felt in his childhood with respect to his male role models when he was growing up, and to drive home that particular absence, so that even in the flashbacks, he can't remember the face, like a couple of people already told, right? So a person not being there, and that person is now dead. There is no way to reconnect the memories of whatever. There is no way to connect the face to a person anymore. It's just a vague collection of sets of ideas and stuff.
I think it's one of his more accessible films, if I could say that. Yeah, I mean, like, it's easily understandable narrative, etc. For example, if you watch Estepan or Pukuviyal, they will challenge your, you know, sort of engagement with a form which is not easily telling you what is happening. Like here, it's a very clear narrative. This one, and I think even Chidambaram and his first film. These three films sort of are these well-formed, clear narrative films of Aravindan, but some of, like Thump, nobody can say whether it's fiction, non-fiction, you know, narrative, nothing is there, right? So like that, I think you should try out some of his other films, which will, from this, is a good launch pad to go into the rest of Aravindan's films, because this is little simpler, I would say, and then it starts complicating. Okay, thank you. I think we're out of time. I'm getting signals. So yeah, so thank you so much for engaging.
All.
Thank you, Ashish.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks,
and Bangalore Film Forum, and of course, ma'am.
Yeah.